You know, when you're stranded on a Class 12 death world with 3 days of rations left, sharing your last meal with an alien isn't exactly standard survival protocol. But what she told me after taking that protein bar, well, let's just say it. Rewrote every field manual I'd ever studied about first contact protocols. Here's the thing about survival protocols. They're written by people who've never been stranded with 3 days of rations watching an alien that shouldn't exist. Standard procedure said, maintain defensive perimeter, conserve resources, and wait for extraction. My training screamed trap when I spotted her. Every field manual from here to Sol system describes her species as apex predators, the kind that tear through armored plating with their bare hands and eat plasma fire for breakfast. But this one looked like she hadn't eaten in weeks. Her limbs trembled with that specific weakness you only see in advanced starvation cases. The torn environmental suit showed injuries that matched local predator patterns, not combat damage. Her posture was all wrong. No defensive crouch, no threat display. Just this raw vulnerability that made my trigger finger feel ashamed. You study the Galactic Compendium enough times and you develop certain expectations. Tier 2 predators don't scavenge. They don't show weakness. They certainly don't collapse 50 meters from your position with what looks like genuine biological distress signals. Her species communicates through dominance displays and threat postures according to all the research. This was something else entirely. I had my sidearm drawn, safety off, following procedure to the letter. My training said this was the oldest trick in the book. Play weak, lure the compassionate target, then strike. But her breathing had that ragged quality you can't fake, the kind where each breath sounds like it might be the last. The conflict between protocol and basic human decency created this weird static in my head. I could see the protein bar in my ration kit. 1 week's supply left if I stretched it. Standard issue NutriPaste that tastes like disappointment but keeps you alive. Her eyes tracked the movement when I reached for it, and that's when I noticed the pupils weren't dilated like a predator's should be. They were contracted, pain-reactive. Real suffering has tells that field manuals never cover. The moment stretched like bad comms delay. Every instinct said, maintain position, wait for backup, follow the rules written by people in safe orbit. But rules don't account for the way a being can look both terrifying and helpless at the same time. They don't cover the ethical calculus of watching something suffer when you have the means to help. So I broke protocol. Tossed the protein bar halfway between us and kept my weapon ready. She moved like someone who'd forgotten how their limbs worked, crawling toward that foil-wrapped disappointment like it was the last thing she'd ever want. When her fingers closed around it, she made this sound I still hear sometimes. Not a threat vocalization, but something closer to relief. The manual never mentioned that could happen. Here's the thing about apparent vulnerability in deep space. It's rarely an accident. As she unwrapped that protein bar, I started noticing details that didn't add up. Her injuries followed patterns. We'd specifically flagged in human empathy response training. The kind of trauma markers that trigger our protective instincts on a biological level. The broken ribs positioned to create that specific asymmetrical breathing pattern, the strategically placed lacerations that mirrored human distress signals almost perfectly. She'd collapsed exactly 53 meters from my position, which put her perfectly between me and the only accessible water source on this rock. The positioning felt too convenient, like someone had studied human movement patterns and knew exactly where I'd need to go next. Her species' research on human psychology turned out to be terrifyingly comprehensive. They'd mapped our emotional triggers better than our own behavioral scientists. The biological markers were what really got me. Her pupils contracted at exactly the right light levels to signal pain in human visual recognition patterns. The tremors in her hands matched the frequency of human starvation responses. Even the way she held the protein bar mirrored how humans cradle precious resources. It was like watching a masterclass in interspecies manipulation. The environment told its own story once I knew what to look for. The rock formations around us showed subtle tool marks, not natural erosion patterns, but precise angles that created acoustic channels perfect for private conversation. The mineral deposits in the soil were arranged to dampen specific sensor frequencies, creating a natural comms blackout zone. Someone had engineered this meeting spot with surgical precision. This whole encounter felt staged, but not in the hostile way I'd been trained to expect. There were no weapon systems hidden in the terrain, no ambush positions, no backup waiting to strike. The setup felt more like an elaborate invitation than a trap. The care taken to manipulate the environment suggested preparation rather than aggression. As she finished the protein bar, her posture shifted from desperate to deliberate. The tremors stopped. The pained breathing evened out. She looked at me with this unnerving clarity that made the hair on my neck stand up. That's when she spoke. For the first time, her voice clear and measured despite the supposed throat injuries. She explained that her people had been waiting for this specific convergence. My ship's distress signal, this planet's orbital alignment, and a human with my particular genetic markers. They'd monitored my survival training records, knew I'd prioritize water procurement after establishing initial security. The injuries were bioengineered displays, the weakness a carefully crafted performance designed to bypass my defensive protocols without triggering combat responses. This wasn't random first contact. This was a scheduled meeting that her people had been preparing for through 3 generations of observational study. The protein bar wasn't charity. It was the key that unlocked the conversation protocol. Her vulnerability was the invitation, and I'd just accepted it by following the exact script they'd predicted I would. So there I was, realizing that protein bar wasn't just nutrition, it was a key. You know how some cultures exchange ceremonial gifts during diplomatic meetings? For her people, food sharing operates on that level of cultural significance, but with biological enforcement mechanisms built right into their DNA. The simple act of accepting sustenance creates what they call a nutritional debt that demands repayment through truth exchange. Here's the thing about their reciprocity codes. They're not just social customs. They're hardwired biological imperatives that trigger specific neurotransmitter releases when activated. Research I'd later access showed their people developed this mechanism as an evolutionary survival trait, ensuring honest information exchange during resource scarcity events. The debt isn't metaphorical. It's a physiological state that causes actual discomfort until balanced through truthful communication. The specific type of human food turned out to be critically important. Our standard issue protein bars contain preservative compounds that her people's biochemistry recognizes as verification signatures. These chemical markers match ancient patterns their ancestors documented from early human trade expeditions centuries ago. The bars act like cryptographic keys that authenticate the exchange protocol, proving the food comes from a verified human source rather than some synthesized imitation. This wasn't random kindness on my part. It was perfect alignment with customs I didn't know existed. Her people have spent generations studying human nutritional supplements, tracking the exact chemical compositions across different manufacturing batches and distribution networks. They knew the specific lot number of the bars in my survival kit would contain the right marker compounds to trigger their truth-telling response. The repayment mechanism works through what she called metabolic verification. When her system processed the nutrients, specific enzyme chains activated that temporarily override normal cognitive filters. It's not that she wanted to tell the truth. She physically couldn't avoid it. Her people's biology treats unfulfilled nutritional debt like we treat oxygen deprivation, creating escalating physiological distress until equilibrium restores through information transfer. The protein bar contained just enough of the marker compounds to activate the protocol without triggering the full debt repayment cycle. It was essentially a handshake verification that allowed her to choose how much truth to share, rather than forcing complete disclosure. She explained that full meals would have activated stronger compulsions, but the snack-sized portion created what she called a conversational opening, rather than an interrogation mandate. What fascinated me was the precision of their research. They'd mapped human food production to the point where they could predict which specific military units would carry which verification compounds based on deployment patterns and supply chain logistics. My protein bar's chemical signature placed me within a specific branch of Space Force operations, which apparently made me qualified for certain clearance levels of information. The truth-telling state manifested physically, too. Her vocal patterns shifted to a more rhythmic cadence, and her pupils displayed this subtle pulsating pattern that she said indicated verified communication mode. Biofeedback monitors would have shown altered brainwave activity and neurotransmitter levels, consistent with compelled truthfulness. It was like watching someone operate under a perfectly calibrated truth serum they'd evolved naturally. Let me start by saying everything we knew about her people was wrong. The galactic community classifies them as Tier 2 predators with moderate technological development and limited spacefaring capability. Turns out that classification system might as well be galactic fiction, written by someone who'd never left their home system. Their actual technological level sits 3 full tiers above what's documented in official records. We're talking about capabilities that make our most advanced ships look like children's toys. Research I accessed later showed they've been systematically editing galactic databases for at least 4 centuries. Every first contact report, every technological assessment, every diplomatic exchange has been carefully curated to maintain this specific narrative of limited capability. Their entire diplomatic corps functions as a cover operation, designed to reinforce the illusion, while their actual operations continue unseen. Even their physical appearance in official meetings represents a deliberate choice. They use biomimetic systems to present this specific form that matches expected predator physiology. The vulnerability she demonstrated was part of this elaborate constructed identity. Her people maintain multiple physical forms depending on operational requirements, each tailored to manipulate specific interspecies reactions. What we perceive as their natural state is actually a carefully engineered presentation, designed to trigger predictable responses from other species. They've mapped galactic psychological profiles so thoroughly that they can calculate exact vulnerability displays that will work on specific individuals. Their technological concealment operates on levels we're only beginning to understand. Sensor dampening fields mask their actual ship capabilities. Communication systems transmit at precisely calibrated levels to suggest inferior technology, and even their energy signatures are artificially limited to match expected outputs. The maintenance of this facade requires constant monitoring and adjustment across thousands of contact points throughout explored space. The reason for this elaborate deception became clear as she continued explaining. Her people hide their true capabilities because they've learned that advanced civilizations attract specific types of attention from entities they'd rather avoid. There are forces in the galaxy that monitor technological development and systematically eliminate species that reach certain thresholds. Their masquerade isn't about deception for its own sake. It's about survival against predators that hunt based on technological signatures. Their entire civilization operates what she called a strategic capability reserve, maintaining advanced technology in hidden locations while presenting this carefully crafted image of moderate development. This allows them to respond to threats when necessary, without triggering the attention mechanisms that would bring larger problems. The balance they maintain is incredibly precise, enough demonstrated capability to deter conventional threats, but sufficiently limited to avoid attracting existential ones. The galactic community's understanding of their military capacity represents perhaps the most successful misinformation campaign in recorded history. We think of them as having limited fleet assets and conventional weaponry. Their actual defensive systems could rewrite the balance of power across 3 sectors if fully deployed. But deployment would mean exposure, and exposure would mean attracting the very attention they've spent centuries avoiding. Their diplomatic interactions follow the same pattern, carefully measured responses designed to maintain their positioning as a mid-tier power with limited ambitions. Every treaty negotiation, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange serves this primary objective of maintaining the facade while gathering intelligence about other species' developments. They're not just hiding their capabilities, they're actively managing galactic perceptions to create a specific ecological niche that keeps them safe from larger threats. Here's the thing about humans: we've been playing a part we never knew. Our expansion across the galaxy followed patterns that seemed perfectly natural at the time. Available resources, habitable zones, strategic positioning. Turns out those patterns were carefully curated by her people through centuries of subtle influence operations. They've been guiding human development like master gardeners tending a particularly useful plant species. Our colony placements weren't random at all. Every settlement, every outpost, every deep space station creates strategic buffers around their hidden territories. The three sectors we thought were frontier regions actually serve as protective layers around their core systems. We positioned our military assets exactly where they needed early warning systems, without ever realizing we were providing perimeter security for someone else's civilization. The independence we celebrated was essentially theater, performed on a stage they built. Research would later show our technological developments followed trajectories that perfectly mirrored their defensive requirements. Our jump drive improvements happened right when they needed faster response capabilities on their borders. Our sensor technology advanced precisely as required to detect the threats they were monitoring. Even our weapon systems evolved to counter specific enemy profiles they couldn't engage directly without revealing their true capabilities. We've been their R&D department without ever receiving the memos. Our military doctrines might as well have been written by their strategic command. The deployment patterns, engagement protocols, even our rules of engagement align so perfectly with their defensive needs that it can't be coincidence. We developed fleet formations that cover their vulnerable flanks, early warning systems that monitor their approach vectors, and response strategies that address threats they've been tracking for generations. Our entire military structure functions as their public-facing defense force. We've been acting as their unwitting shield against greater threats for about 2 centuries now. Every conflict we've engaged in, every border dispute we've settled, every patrol route we've established has served their security interests alongside our own. The beautiful part is how natural it all felt. We made these decisions based on what appeared to be our own strategic assessments and national interests. The illusion of independent choice was maintained perfectly throughout. Our perceived independence was this carefully cultivated fiction, supported by thousands of subtle manipulations. Economic incentives directed our corporate expansions toward needed sectors. Political influences guided treaty negotiations in specific directions. Even our cultural development followed patterns that made us more compatible with their long-term needs. The entire human narrative of galactic expansion represents a masterpiece of gentle guidance. The scale of this manipulation only became clear when she showed me the strategic maps. Human space isn't adjacent to their territory. It's interwoven with it in this complex pattern where our visible presence covers their hidden operations. Our shipping lanes provide cover for their logistics. Our communications networks carry their encrypted traffic. Our diplomatic missions create opportunities for their intelligence gathering. We're the public face they operate behind. Humans are essentially the visible front for their hidden civilization. We take the diplomatic meetings, fight the public conflicts, and absorb the galactic attention while they maintain their strategic concealment. Our role isn't accidental. It's the result of generations of careful social engineering designed to create the perfect buffer species. We got to feel like independent actors while performing precisely the functions they needed performed. So there I was, learning that predators aren't always what they seem. The galactic classification system places her species as apex predators, based on limited violent encounters that followed predictable patterns. What we interpreted as hunting behavior was actually something entirely different, a cosmic maintenance operation that we fundamentally misunderstood. Their true nature diverges completely from the predator classification. They're not hunters in the conventional sense, but guardians operating on a scale we're only beginning to comprehend. Research would later show they selectively cull species that demonstrate specific dangerous evolutionary trajectories. Anything that threatens broader galactic stability through uncontrolled expansion or destructive technological development, what we saw as aggression was actually precision ecological management. Their apparent violent encounters follow strict protocols designed to minimize collateral damage while achieving specific population control objectives. They target only the most dangerous elements within a species, often focusing on leadership or genetic lines that demonstrate problematic traits. The attacks aren't random but surgical interventions, calculated to redirect civilizations away from destructive paths without eliminating them entirely. Even their hunting patterns that we'd documented for decades actually followed conservation principles. The ships they destroyed were often carefully disabled rather than obliterated, with crews recovered and studied. The territories they conquered were actually placed under protective management to prevent resource exploitation. Every action we'd interpreted as expansionist served preventive ecological purposes instead. The galactic community's misunderstanding stems from seeing their actions through conventional military frameworks. We applied standard threat assessment models to behavior that followed entirely different rules. Their operations look like predation because they use similar tactical approaches, but the strategic objectives are conservation rather than domination. The weapon systems we fear are actually tools for precise intervention. Their conservation role extends beyond species management to include planetary systems and even stellar environments. They monitor resource depletion rates, genetic diversity, and technological development curves across thousands of civilizations. Interventions occur only when specific thresholds indicate potential galactic-scale consequences. The violence we witness represents their last resort after centuries of observation and subtle influence attempts. The resolution of this misunderstanding changes everything about interstellar relations. They protect life by controlling dangerous populations rather than dominating them. Their actions preserve biodiversity and maintain cosmic balance, preventing civilizations from collapsing under their own destructive impulses or threatening others through uncontrolled expansion. What we feared as predators are actually the gardeners of the galaxy, tending ecosystems on scales we can barely comprehend. This revelation reframes centuries of conflict and encounters. Every attack we documented served specific conservation purposes. Every territory they claimed was actually protected from exploitation. Their entire operational methodology focuses on minimum necessary intervention to maintain system stability. The predator label we gave them says more about our limited perspective than their actual nature. The implications ripple through every aspect of galactic politics and military strategy. Alliances based on fear of their predation need re-evaluation. Defense preparations aimed at their supposed expansionism become questionable. Even our own development trajectories might require examination against their conservation criteria. Understanding their true purpose means rethinking fundamental assumptions about power and safety in the galaxy. They operate on timescales that make human planning look impulsive. Their interventions consider consequences across millennia, weighing short-term violence against long-term preservation. The balance they maintain isn't about dominance but sustainability, ensuring that life continues despite civilization's tendencies toward self-destruction. Their methods appear harsh only if you miss the countless lives saved through selective, timely action. Let me start by saying some truths are dangerous to know. The galaxy operates on this comfortable fiction that we understand the major threats, rival empires, resource conflicts, the usual political nonsense. What we don't see are the existential dangers her people contain through sacrifices that would break most civilizations. Their entire existence revolves around maintaining barriers against threats that operate on cosmological scales. Here's the thing about dimensional barriers. They're not passive structures. They require constant energy input and monitoring that consume resources on staggering levels. Her people maintain thousands of these containment fields across known space, each one preventing incursions from realities where physics operates differently. The energy requirements alone would bankrupt entire sectors, which explains why their civilization appears resource-poor, despite advanced technology. Their population numbers tell the real story. Research shows they maintain artificially low birth rates because every citizen serves rotation duty on containment facilities. The duty isn't optional, it's a biological imperative built into their genetic coding. They spend significant portions of their lives powering systems that prevent cosmic-level disasters, which explains why we never see large populations despite their technological capabilities. The vulnerability she demonstrated reflected actual resource depletion from recent containment duty. Their technological development focuses exclusively on containment systems rather than expansion or comfort. Every innovation serves the primary purpose of maintaining dimensional integrity. Their ships, their weapons, even their communication systems all prioritize stability over capability. This explains why their technology appears limited. They're not developing consumer goods or luxury items, just increasingly efficient containment mechanisms. Their political isolation makes perfect sense once you understand the security requirements. Every diplomatic interaction represents a potential breach point for the things they contain. Limited contact reduces the risk of external interference with their containment systems. What we interpreted as xenophobia or arrogance was actually operational security on a civilization scale level. The constant resource depletion shows in everything about them. Their ships run on minimal power. Their colonies operate with bare essential infrastructure, Their entire civilization functions like a military organization constantly deployed. The protein bar I offered represented more calories than she'd consumed in a standard duty cycle. Her people live in perpetual rationing mode because every available resource goes toward containment. What they contain defines their entire existence. Extra-dimensional entities that would consume our reality as fuel. Beings that operate on physics that make black holes look stable. The containment isn't about keeping things out. It's about preventing leakage from realities where concepts like matter and energy follow different rules. Their duty is maintaining the fundamental stability of our universe against incursions that would unravel reality itself. The resolution of this understanding changes how you see every interaction with their species. Their limited territorial claims aren't about expansion. They're buffer zones around containment facilities. Their occasional aggressive actions aren't predation. They're preventing other species from accidentally breaching containment fields. Even their technological secrecy serves the purpose of preventing others from experimenting with forces they can't control. They stand between our reality and things that would make cosmic horrors look like playground fantasies. The weight of that duty explains everything about their behavior: the isolation, the secrecy, the apparent technological stagnation. They're not hiding their capabilities. They're directing all their resources toward preventing disasters that would end civilization as we know it. The protein bar wasn't just food. It was fuel for a guardian who spends her life protecting realities she'll never get to enjoy. Here's the thing about truth. Timing is everything. This revelation wasn't random confession or accidental disclosure. Her people had been waiting for the specific convergence of factors that made this moment the only possible time for this conversation to occur. The calculations involved spanned decades of observation and prediction models that would make our best strategic planners look like amateurs. My genetic profile turned out to be the first critical factor. They'd been monitoring human DNA markers for generations, tracking specific combinations that indicate particular psychological resilience patterns. My particular genetic sequence showed compatibility with their truth reception protocols. Something about my neurotransmitter, balance and cognitive processing made me capable of handling the information without psychological fragmentation. They need recipients who can comprehend the truth without breaking under the weight of it. This Deathworld's position created the second necessary condition. The planet's current orbital alignment placed it in a unique sensor shadow relative to major monitoring stations and rival empires' listening posts. The local star's radiation patterns created natural encryption for our communication, making this one of the few places in the sector where this conversation could happen without detection. The very hostility that made this world dangerous also made it secure. Current galactic tensions provided the urgency. 3 major empires were approaching conflict thresholds that would inevitably interfere with containment operations. The rising military activities across multiple sectors created vibration patterns that threatened dimensional stability near several critical barrier points. Their systems were detecting stress fractures that required immediate, coordinated response before cascading failures began. Their containment systems were approaching critical failure points that hadn't been seen in centuries. Multiple barrier generators were operating beyond designed capacity, and resource depletion had reached levels that prevented adequate maintenance. The protein bar I offered contained specialized compounds that activated her truth-telling biology, but it also provided emergency nutrients that stabilized her system enough for prolonged communication. The selection criteria went far beyond simple genetics or timing. They'd studied my service records, psychological evaluations, and decision patterns across multiple crisis scenarios. My responses to unexpected situations, my handling of classified information, even my personal ethics all factored into their assessment. They needed someone who would understand the need for discretion, while still taking appropriate action. The resolution became clear as she explained their selection process. They chose me because my profile indicated I'd prioritize galactic stability over personal advancement or species loyalty. My record showed consistent pattern of weighing consequences and making decisions based on broader implications rather than immediate benefits. They calculated I'd understand the necessity of their operations and wouldn't trigger panic responses that could exacerbate existing tensions. Their risk assessment models predicted I'd seek verification before acting, would consult with appropriate authorities rather than making unilateral decisions, and would maintain security protocols despite the shocking nature of the information. They needed a messenger, not a martyr or a revolutionary, someone who could carry the truth without letting it consume them or cause unnecessary disruption. The protein bar's activation compounds worked in conjunction with my specific biochemistry to create this temporary window of verified communication. The combination of nutrients and my genetic markers allowed for information transfer at fidelity levels impossible through normal channels. This wasn't just conversation, it was calibrated data transmission using biological systems as the medium. They'd positioned rescue assets to extract me precisely, because the information transfer created obligations on both sides. The truth came with responsibility for its proper handling, and their selection process ensured I understood that burden before the first word was spoken. The timing wasn't just about their needs. It was about finding the right human at the right moment with the right capacity to bear this knowledge. So there I was, realizing some meals come with permanent side effects. That protein bar didn't just fill her stomach. It filled my head with knowledge that rewired my understanding of galactic politics, security protocols, and basic survival. Knowing their true purpose changes how you see every interaction, every treaty, every conflict you've ever studied. The weight of that understanding settles in your gut like lead. The immediate consequences become apparent the moment you comprehend what's at stake. Other species would absolutely exterminate her people if they learned the full truth about their capabilities and operations. The galactic community has demonstrated time and again that it fears power. It doesn't understand more than actual threats. Research across multiple first contact scenarios shows civilizations consistently attack advanced species preemptively rather than risk unpredictable capabilities. I now represented a catastrophic security breach in their carefully maintained system. My survival depended on perfectly managing information that could trigger sector-wide conflict, if mishandled. The protocols for containing this knowledge were now my personal responsibility, with failure meaning not just my death, but potentially civilization-level consequences. Every communication, every report, every casual conversation became a potential disclosure point. Even accidental slips could have devastating effects. Mentioning the wrong detail in a standard debriefing, suggesting unusual knowledge during tactical analysis, even casual speculation about their capabilities. Any of it could alert monitoring systems or trigger investigations that would uncover the truth. The margin for error was essentially zero, with detection thresholds set dangerously low by paranoid security services across multiple empires. The galactic balance depends on maintained ignorance about their true nature. Their containment operations function precisely because other species perceive them as limited predators rather than galactic guardians. Revealing their actual role would trigger panic responses, preemptive strikes, and political maneuvers that would inevitably compromise dimensional barriers. The very stability they protect requires their continued misclassification. My choice became terrifyingly clear: warn humanity about our unwitting role in their operations, or maintain the delicate balance that keeps multiple civilizations from destruction. Warning my species meant risking exposure that could trigger the very conflicts they contain. Staying silent meant allowing humanity to continue as unwitting pawns in a game with cosmic stakes. Neither option felt adequate. Both carried unimaginable consequences. The resolution formed slowly as I considered the timelines involved. Their operations spanned centuries. Their planning accommodates variables we can't even perceive. My individual decision mattered less than maintaining the overall stability they'd engineered. The choice wasn't about right or wrong, but about understanding scale. Personal ethics versus cosmic consequences. The protein bar's cost included accepting that some truths are too dangerous to share, even with those you're sworn to protect. The weight of this secret changes how you breathe, how you think, how you operate. Every decision now filters through this new understanding of galactic mechanics. The survival protocols I'd trained with suddenly seemed childish compared to the actual security requirements of containing universe-level truths. That protein bar came with side effects that would last a lifetime, assuming I managed to survive the immediate consequences of possessing knowledge that could rewrite galactic history. Let me start by saying that moments define civilizations. I stood there with information that could rewrite humanity's future, understanding that my next decision would ripple through generations. The immediate choice appeared binary. warn my people about our unwitting role in their operations, or maintain the delicate silence that kept galactic stability intact. Both options carried catastrophic potential that made standard military decisions look like child's play. Warning humanity meant triggering premature confrontations we couldn't possibly win. The revelation would spread through command structures like wildfire, creating panic responses and knee-jerk military preparations that would inevitably alert other galactic powers. Research indicates such disclosures historically lead to arms races and preemptive strikes as species scramble to rebalance perceived threats. Our sudden awareness would destabilize carefully maintained treaties and create exactly the kind of chaos that threatens containment systems. Staying silent presented different dangers. Without understanding our role, humanity might accidentally compromise their operations through well-intentioned but misguided actions. Our expansion patterns might shift away from needed buffer zones. Our technological development might diverge from required trajectories. Our diplomatic efforts might inadvertently expose their concealed capabilities. The research she provided showed numerous historical instances where ignorant species nearly triggered disasters through innocent mistakes. Her revelation included specific guidance calibrated against centuries of probability modeling. Her people had calculated success rates for various disclosure scenarios, with most outcomes clustering around catastrophic failure points. Their models accounted for human psychological responses, political structures, communication patterns, and even media dissemination rates. The numbers weren't encouraging. Traditional approaches showed high probability of systemic collapse. My unique perspective introduced what they called an unpredictable variable. Having actually interacted with them, understood their true nature, and witnessed their sacrifice firsthand, my assessment incorporated elements their models couldn't quantify. I recognized that neither pure disclosure nor complete silence would work. Humanity needed guidance rather than revelation, partnership rather than shock. The resolution formed as I considered their own methods. They hadn't shocked me with truth. They'd carefully prepared the groundwork, ensured I understood context, and provided supporting evidence. I needed to approach this the same way rather than treating it as simple information transfer. The choice wasn't about what to tell humanity, but how to responsibly manage our transition from unwitting pawns to conscious participants. I chose the third path their models hadn't adequately weighted: direct consultation with their leadership. If humanity was going to understand its role, we needed proper introduction rather than shocking revelation. We required guidance on managing this knowledge, protocols for responsible participation, and phased integration into their operational awareness. Throwing truth at my species would be like giving explosives to children. The responsible approach involved controlled exposure. With proper safeguards, the decision meant trusting their judgment while asserting human dignity. We deserved to understand our role, but we needed that understanding delivered in ways that wouldn't destroy us or compromise galactic stability. Their leadership would either accept this approach or reject it, but the choice to seek proper channels felt like the only option that respected both their sacrifice and human potential. Sometimes the bravest choice isn't between obvious options, but finding the path nobody thought to map.